In human resources, yeah, so there are a number of powerful tools, digital tools, that human resources can employ today, ones we're all aware of. So applicant tracking systems, or ATSs, learning management systems, ERP or human resource information systems are all things that are quite well known to us. The frustration, I think, for the HR community typically is one of those systems not always being joined up and not always being of the same manufacturer, and therefore it being down to the human resource executives to figure out how to kind of derive data from those things. And unless you are a much larger organization that can afford the likes of an Oracle or an SAP, and buy every single module that they have to offer, you're not necessarily going to get that joined up view. But I think in addition to that, in addition to those tools, I think some new tools coming online, which are going to be phenomenal, are going to be workforce enhancement and employee engagement tools. So I'm now seeing a number of companies, an example would be Cognology, a company down in Melbourne, Australia, that is developing a tool that is primarily around how do we build that sense of employee connectedness. And it really starts with the onboarding process and works very quickly into the learning and development process, and as well to the connectivity the connectivity process within organizations. How do I know who I need to work with to get things done? Who do I go to? There's also a mentoring component built into that, and all sorts. And believe it or not, it has nothing to do with tracking your time off work, your benefits, your pay. Those elements are kind of left out. Perhaps the most powerful tools I'm seeing coming online would be the workforce analytics tools, the big data analytics tools. There are a number now hitting the market. The likes of, I think IBM Connexa I mentioned earlier, again, typically for a larger enterprise for sure, but there are at least 6 or 7 different smaller SME-sized workforce analytics tools that have come online. And these are now helping the human resource organization understand the data sets and the reporting that are coming off all of their disparate functions and features and tools that they've used to date. And allowing the human resource department to mix and match that information again with the likes of finance, with marketing campaigns, with your sales CRM systems, and with employee and customer satisfaction data. And some very, very interesting and powerful insights are coming in off the back of that. And it allows human resource managers to, for the first time ever, to scientifically monitor and assess some very esoteric programs that they've tried to utilize in the past. Some as specific and functional as recruitment and learning and development and promotion and pay. Others that are a lot more esoteric, things like cultural programs and employee engagement programs, inclusion and diversity programs. That is what data analytics is now affording us the ability to look into. Yeah, a lot of people talk about these shiny objects, these fancy new technologies, but nobody seems to be talking about what specific insight do you actually derive from this. So I've spent a fair amount of time, again, with the IBM Watson folks, and I guess what I was so impressed with was the fact that I didn't need to be a data scientist. I needed to have sort of a basic understanding of statistics, literally one college course, and I needed to have at least a logical mindset to kind of understand what it was I was looking for, and to see if these magical correlations that were kicked out by the Watson tool were frankly of any use to me. But the kinds of things that you can take a look at and that become clear very, very quickly are things like, let's take a look at our first year performers and find out who's doing exceptionally well based on our performance data. And let's look at where they came from. Did they come from a top 10 business school? Did they come from an otherwise perfectly fine school, but certainly not considered a top 10? But what other experience, say internships or prior work experience, did they come with? And what then is the correlation between that and first year performance? And very quickly, based on some of the data that we played around with, we discovered that yes, the folks coming from top 10 business schools did exceptionally well, yet also there was a huge population of people who also did well that did not come from top 10 business schools, but all of those people had internships prior to joining. So they had real life work experience. Interesting. What does that mean? Well, that potentially means that we need to look at whether or not we want to keep spending all that time, money, and energy on hunting a very scarce and very expensive resource from a top 10 business school. Maybe we don't need to be doing that nearly as much. Another thing that data potentially can tell you is if you link, for instance, employee behavior and performance, say with customer satisfaction data and even employee satisfaction data, you were able to build personas, basically archetypes of our best performers, and really start to understand why they are so successful with our customers. Why are they so successful at generating revenue? What makes them very different than the rest of the population? That becomes then, your absolute go-to factor in terms of an archetype that you want to capture in terms of skills, competencies, knowledge, and experience, and then bake that into your recruitment program. Those are the people you need for the future. The question then becomes one of, what do we do with the rest of the folks who aren't performing nearly as well? And how do we basically either develop them and scale them up, or potentially exit them from the company? These are very, very powerful discussions that suddenly put the human resource executive at the right-hand side of the CEO. And you can start to think then, when you do things like heat maps, in terms of geographic dispersion of performance in your organization, where are we missing? Where do we have gaps? Where do we need to either create new learning and development opportunities, or job shadowing, or whatever it is, or mentorship programs, or coaching to get these people up to speed? Where potentially do we need to acquire companies that will basically flesh out those skill gaps? These are powerful conversations that the CEO is wanting to have and will basically help him or her plan for the following year. It's a very different level of discussion than what human resources has been able to accomplish in the past.